Hi, and welcome back to the Brando and Joe podcast. For this podcast episode, our guest is Tyler Mirando. He received his master's and Ph.D. in IO psychology from Central Michigan University, currently works as a senior IO psychologist for HackerRank, and previously worked for APTmetrics as a senior consultant. Welcome, Tyler.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Joe, for having me.
Yeah,
We're really
absolutely. Thanks for
happy to
joining
have you
us.
on here, so
Yeah,
thank you for
absolutely.
joining us.
Absolutely.
It's interesting hearing that little bio. Joe and I were talking about this. You don't really hear people with the title IO psychologist. So, kind of explain to Joe and I what that means and what that looks like for you in your work, Tyler.
Yeah, definitely, guys. And so I actually heard a few comments when I accepted the position with HackerRank as well, with people saying, yeah, you never hear about somebody actually having a job title IO psychologist. It's always talent management specialist or some type of people analytics. So it's pretty cool to actually be able to say I'm an IO psychologist and have the job title reflect it. Um, and what I do is really variable on a day-to-day basis. It does take on a consultant level role. A lot of it is internal consulting for HackerRank and helping to have our internal teams, whether that's our data teams or engineering teams or any of our product teams, understanding how to apply IO psychology. Right. So HackerRank is a software company, and they're coming into IO psychology and growing quickly and doing a really great job at it. And that's in
Wow.
big part thanks to our growing IO psychology team. And so IO psychologists internally help out with figuring out how can you actually apply assessment science? How can you be scientifically based in predicting future performance, right?
Right.
But also working with external partners. So whether that's any of our customers or prospects, helping to understand what exactly we do and why we're doing it by the books in the right way.
And how many people
So,
are on that team? You said the team of IO psychologists.
Yeah, so we have a team of three IO psychologists. Our chief IO psychologist, Jeff Facto, who's a PsyOp fellow, as well as myself and Kama Dodge.
and now I guess they were looking for people with like an IO psychology degree. Because I feel like you see it kind of more and more these days. But if there's like an analytics job, like your IO psychology degree has those requirements, but it's like they're not actually specifically looking for that type.
Yeah. I mean, so with this job in particular, they were looking for somebody with skills in IO psychology, skills in assessment and employee selection, any type of that experience. So I specifically previously worked at APTmetrics on the talent acquisition team, helping with developing out employee selection programs for honestly a broad range of different industries and companies. So it was a pretty perfect fit. And yeah, they were exactly looking for that. But of course, it does come down to the skill basis, right? Do you have the skills to do the job? And the degree kind of comes afterward.
And we talk about our selection assessment class a little bit on this podcast, and we loved it. We felt like we learned so much. Now I'm wondering, did if you even had a selection assessment class in your degree, and do you think it like helped you in like achieving these skills for the certain position that you have now, or was it kind of like you get on the job and you learn more there?
Yeah, I'd say it was a little bit of both, right? So I earned my PhD, as you mentioned, from Central Michigan University, and we had personnel classes and advanced personnel classes where we learned many of those. Like you're talking like your foundational job analysis, which if anybody asks now, what's the first thing you're going to start with is job analysis. So learn that foundation and then learn a little bit more about employee selection and development programs. So it was kind of a full sweep across the talent management pool, right? So you have that building and selecting employees, and then how do you actually maintain them and grow them over time? So it was a little bit of both, but it wasn't necessarily a direct, yeah, this is an employee selection class. But I definitely, just because you learn it in school doesn't mean that's exactly what it looks like in the workplace, right? So once you get out there, I mean, I learned tons over the past 5 years that I've been in the field.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. And I wonder as somebody who was a consultant and now is in that internal role, does the selection that you're doing, does it look different for you in this position now So like when you're working with selection and data, does that look different for you now?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily like an internal role. So I'm not necessarily selecting for HackerRank. I'm necessarily helping our internal customers apply IO psychology. But I'm very much so still external facing. I'll work with our external
Oh,
customers, which HackerRank has a massive pool of almost 4,000 customers. So it's quite a few interactions. Not to say that I myself have 4,000 customers, but it does include interacting with them when they need something done right on the IO psychology side, whether that's job analyses or content validation studies or criterion validation studies, which doesn't happen quite as often in our industry, or something like adverse impact analyses. So whenever they need something from that IO side, that's when we kind of step in. So it very much so is that consultant aspect still, just also balancing the side of helping to have the HackerRank internal teams come up to speed on IO psychology as well.
It's uh it's cool to hear about like all the customers you get to work with on like such a massive scale.
Definitely.
You said like almost 4,000, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so globally about 4,000 customers. Those do span anywhere from your enterprise customers all the way down to people who have probably 13 or 14 different employees, right? So it's pretty broad, but
Oh,
yeah, quite a broad selection.
oh, cool. And
Def-
so it was interesting to hear about like your pathway um, to selection and assessment and everything you do. And I know previously on this before this episode we talked a little bit about skills-based assessment. And to kind of I guess get into the meat of this episode, before we really dive into that, could you talk to us a little bit about what skills-based assessment is and like how you apply that in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you asked. So when we think about a skills-based assessment or a skills-based organization, right? So this is kind of the new thing that most organizations are moving toward. And when we think about this, it's instead of a degree-based or experience-based hiring, right? So let's say your Google, for example, is looking for a new software engineer. They could potentially look for somebody that is maybe has 5 years of experience and has a degree from Central Michigan University, right? Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that person's better at doing their job than somebody who went to a coding boot camp and has those same skills. So a skills-based organization and skills-based hiring is employee selection based on the skills that an employee has rather than their different accolades that they've earned. So it helps to level the playing field for DE and I different implications. It helps with people who might not have had that opportunity to go to college but they have those skills. They can have that same opportunity. And so at HackerRank, what we do is we have a taxonomy of all of these different jobs and what they look like across almost 70 different roles in data science and technology and coding and software development, and you name it, we probably have it, right? So we've kind of mapped out all of those jobs in the tech industry, which every company is a tech company at this point. And so then we looked a little bit deeper and we said, yeah, but it's not just about the jobs. So what are the skills that support success within those roles? And we've identified those through a pretty broad scrape of different job descriptions and the like, and figured out what's important for those jobs. And now that we understand that, we're able to develop assessments for those skills. So when I say skills-based hiring, it's making sure that you know what skills are important for a job. That's based on a job analysis, right? And now you know based on that legal defensibility, this is important to the job. And then you are able to link with, say, a local validation study that the skills that are in our assessments are directly related to the skills that you identified. And that's exactly what that skills forward approach would look like. And of course, that's going to vary by company, but generally, that's what it would look like. Is making sure that you're assessing for skills, not pedigree.
Oh, that definitely makes a lot of sense and goes with a lot of the things that we learned in class.
Definitely.
I know Joe and I did a training project together, but you talk about doing job analysis there, right? Like, how long did that process take you? Like, that had to have been when you're compiling all that information. That would probably be a pretty big project.
Yeah, so truthfully, that analysis happened before I came on board to
Mm.
HackerRank. But I imagine it was quite an extensive process. They analyzed tens and tens and tens of thousands of different descriptions of these roles. So it's truthfully one of the most comprehensive analyses that I've seen. Um, but yeah, job analyses can stretch quite a long time. I've seen job analyses that stretch for years. So it can happen, right?
And are you just disregarding like past employment or education, or is it more of like a secondary viewing? Like how much do the skills weigh in like a skills based assessment? I guess.
Yeah, it really depends on what the customer or client, whatever you want to refer to them as, wants, right? So we're providers of an assessment, and we suggest that a skills forward approach is best, and that's should be your primary basis is what's important for the job and what is this assessment measuring. Um, Now you could also say, yes, somebody needs a engineering degree, and that's perfectly fine. There's no problem with that as long as it's job related and it's going to help somebody to perform better, right? Um, we're just suggesting that the primary focus should be on the skills that would enable somebody to be more successful in their job. So yeah, it definitely can still be part of it.
And so when you talk about those skills and stuff, like there's so many resources out there that are available to students and
Yeah.
for people out there trying to get jobs in the real world. Um, when you talk about like certificates, is that kind of what you mean by building up those skills? So like people can earn certificates saying they're like proficient in certain, like for example, Python or different types of ways of interpreting data. So like they can focus on that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I know a lot of large enterprise organizations are looking at different prospective candidates who have gone through those boot camps or learned those skills or badges. Even HackerRank has a community of online software developers who's learning and growing with a community and earning badges and earning these different boot camp accolades, if you will, where they're able to earn in a proving ground and basically show that they do have the skills to stand up and do the job well. So yeah,
So
absolutely that.
that makes me think about like what are your thoughts then on things like LinkedIn Learning or I know what there's another hiring space that has like their own learning platforms where people can increase their skill set. Like what are your thoughts on those then?
Yeah, I think they're fantastic. I think they need to be checked. So we can't just be handing out a badge or a certificate just because somebody watched a video. That needs to actually be properly assessed, in my opinion. And I think that's where IO psychology comes into play, right? So if we're just giving out a certificate because somebody watched a video, but they were actually washing the dishes while the video was playing, right? That's probably not great. But if there's a way to assess at the end or throughout, ideally, with a cumulative assessment after, I think that's fantastic, right? Especially if those are publicly available and the general public can have access to those, that's even better, right? Because that allows for equal opportunity. So I think it's fantastic as long as they're monitored to be sure that the certificate somebody's earning is actually the skill they're capable of performing.
That totally makes sense. I actually participated in one of the coding boot camps back in college because I there was a time where I was like, oh, maybe I'll become a software engineer. Um, and I mean, the skills I've still used some of them today, but you're right in terms of like, is it just a video or is it like a video and practice with projects? And it
Absolutely.
definitely makes a difference.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, absolutely.
but it's cool to see that like these boot camps and certificates actually kind of mean something, and
Yeah, yeah,
people could actually use them and gain success from them.
I think it's an awesome trend that we're seeing, and it's becoming more common in across many different companies. So I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I can add to that too. Like I know when I was an undergrad, like we had all these different things that our school was offering for us to take and get certificates on. And one of the ones that I ended up doing was like a Microsoft one.
Yeah,
But things of that nature are just so valuable, and people don't realize how much you have access to, especially if you're coming from undergrad to then go and do IO psychology post grad. like you have access to so many resources that you can use to beef up your resume, even when you don't have the work experience that you need.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one of the interesting things that we're doing at HackerRank, which we actually just recently launched it, is something called Skill Up. And so it basically enables employees to be able to grow within their organization. So maybe you are maybe you're in a tech company and you want to be a software engineer for them, right? But you're not right now. Maybe currently you work as a data analyst and you don't know how to develop code right now. With the Skill Up basically product that we're starting to launch, somebody would be able to take these assessments and grow and learn over time. And also it helps with a skills-based organization, because then this company knows, okay, this person who's not in the field or not in the job right now has these skills, and it allows for different like cross pollinations, if you will, where that person might have never had that opportunity previously. So I think there's a broad array of opportunities that are popping up and are going to change the way we think about skills based companies.
It's an interesting concept. Is it kind of like a course with projects, and then it shows the company that I can, I'm proficient in web development and like JavaScript or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. Think of it almost as like a proving ground. So you have the opportunity to show the skills that you have and grow in them, understand where you stand against others, against the skills that are needed. And then, depending on, of course, how an organization uses it, that organization can look for talent, figure out where they need to upskill their teams. So perhaps their data analyst teams aren't all that good at visualization, right? So they could create that test and figure out this is where we need to improve, and create or provide training for that team broadly. So I think it has sweeping implications rather than just one person coming up or improving over time or going for a single job. I think it's a little bit broader, but yeah, it definitely could be used that way.
So we've been talking about selection and talking about all this job analysis and um, collecting all this information. And so now, Tyler, I know Joe and I really wanted to talk to you about the use of AI and like specifically ChatGPT.
Definitely.
How has that affected the work you're doing, and are you seeing it already have an impact in the world that you're working in now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I definitely think that ChatGPT and OpenAI and other LLMs are changing the way that assessment works, right? And especially as we think about the upcoming New York City law that's going to be taking effect on the 5th of July, I believe. It's important to think about how we're applying AI. And so with HackerRank, we're applying it in a few different ways. So one of the ways that we're thinking about uh, artificial intelligence is looking for cheating detection or plagiarism detection. So, for example, previously we were using primarily match between code. So, Joe, let's say that you submit a piece of code, and Brandon, you took this same test or assessment 3 weeks ago, and your code looks very similar. Just because it looks similar doesn't mean that you cheated. It might be an indicator, but it's not a perfect substitute for it. Well, we're actually integrating behavioral models of different indicators for cheating and plagiarism, so that we're not just depending on the match of the code, and we're actually much more predictive. I believe we're sitting just about a 90% prediction rate on actually being able to identify people that are cheating or plagiarizing other person's works, whether that's
Wow.
pulling from ChatGPT or it's pulling from some other person sitting in the room, right? So think image processing and stuff like that if it's enabled. So some really cool stuff going on with AI. And in terms of ChatGPT, that's another one that we've been talking about. Of course, I think everybody's talking about it right now,
Mhm.
especially with assessment, right? Whether you're talking about assessment in the classroom, or assessment for a job or whatever else it might be, right? ChatGPT is here, and I think we're already on version 4 or 4.5, something like that.
Mhm.
So the fact that people are already using this, and I want to say like 60% of developers are already using it on a day-to-day basis, it's something that's not going away. And so we as an assessment company need to figure out what does that actually look like? And so our product teams are working and developing new evolutions of what the current state looks like on literally a daily basis. I'm not definitely coding forward. I can't develop a piece of code, but they're working pretty immensely at it. And so some of the stuff that they're doing is really cool, like figuring out, okay, if a customer wants to actually enable a candidate to be able to code within the interface, they can do that without leaving the interface. And if they want to do so and use ChatGPT, we're working on that capability as well. So it's some pretty cool stuff of figuring out how many instances or what level you want to integrate ChatGPT or other language models into the assessment. I think it's something that's going to evolve over time because it sure somebody could use that skill, but do you want them to use it? Well, that's based on what the customer would want or the client would want.
Oh yeah.
I feel like we're here in a with ChatGPT. There's a lot of like good and bad that can come from it. A lot of people we've talked to says it's not going to necessarily replace a lot of jobs. It's just going to change them, and it depends how those people are going to use those new AI tools. So it's cool to hear that HackerRank is doing some good with it,
Yeah,
at least.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's the big scare. Like, is ChatGPT going to eliminate my job, or is a software developer no longer going to exist? Like, no, probably not, because somebody has to develop ChatGPT. Um,
Yeah.
I think it changes the way that the job looks. I don't think it eliminates a job.
Yeah, and I was talking with a software engineer, I believe it was actually yesterday, and I was talking to him about his use of AI and specifically ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and he was like, "Well, it's in my space, so I have to like get assimilated with it for sure and figure out what I'm doing." And I was like, and I said to him, and he was like, "This is definitely right. Is that if I'm not using it, so one of my competitors is, or
Yep.
someone else who could take my job is." So, and he was like, "That's a very good point." So it's true. Like as we grow and we learn in our roles, we have to learn to adapt using AI because if we're not, other people are, and
Yeah.
they're just going to come in and outwork us because it's so much more efficient.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to think about all the different ways that artificial intelligence and whether you're talking about ChatGPT or any other language model is going to influence our field, whether it's in terms of what jobs people are performing or even how we do our job, right? So are we thinking about maybe using AI to develop new test questions or new test cases, whatever it might be? I think there's a ton of opportunity to be had there.
One of the things we talked about in our courses in the use of AI was, correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, but I think it was the use of AI in selection. So instead of, like a person interviewing you, it's,
Mm-hmm.
AI. Uh, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that because I know our class was pretty split. Some people like that human connection, and they thought like with the use of AI, they weren't able to kind of like talk about themselves as much. And then we talked a little bit about like adverse impact with it and like what kind
Yeah.
of words that they had picking up. Is that something that's like come across your space at all?
Yeah, so I haven't directly created any assessments like that. There's certainly companies out there that do it, right? Um, and I think that space is going to evolve quite a bit over the next year or so. With as I mentioned previously, the new AI law that's coming into effect on the 5th of July, or actually that's when it's going to be enforced. I believe it's already technically in effect, but not being enforced yet. When that happens, I think that could shift what those assessment tools look like. The reason being that with this new AI law, um, anytime AI is used in the selection process, it actually needs to be audited by an independent auditor. And there's still not necessarily a closed position on what that looks like, who can be an auditor, whether that's an IO psychologist or a law firm. And it also the results of that audit need to be published online in terms of when it happened, what their adverse impact ratios look like. So I think it opens up a question of what does that actually look like, right?
Yeah.
And so as that law evolves over time, and that's just for New York City, right? They're talking about stuff federally and globally as well, I'm sure. So as these new implication laws come into implication and of assessment and AI and assessment and selection, I think that's going to dramatically shift the way that we do it.
That could be a new IO field we could get as a AI auditor.
Right? Yeah,
Oh,
I think
definitely.
it's I think it's a topic of discussion for sure. It's IO is only growing with this trend, in my opinion.
And I guess they can kind of lead us into our last question. Because as we know, I know we've talked about this before, that IO is such a great field to get in because there's not just one thing you can do. It leads you down a whole bunch of different paths.
Definitely.
So for those new IO students, whether they're coming into a graduate program, just graduated, or currently in one, do you think you have like one piece of advice for either just getting to the field broadly or maybe even specifically like a tech field?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that I did with my career, and right, I'm still early in my career. I graduated with my PhD in 2021, in December of 2021 at that. So it's only been a couple years since I finished, but every opportunity that I had, I jumped on. And I would suggest that people do the same, right? If you have an opportunity and you turn it down, you're never going to know what that could have been or could have looked like. And so, for example, when I was going through grad school, I worked with a company now known as Raytheon Technologies. Previously, it was United Technologies, in a facet of their organization, supporting learning and development because I thought that might be somewhere where I want to go. And I also worked supporting HR as a HR business partner. Worked with APT. Now I work at HackerRank. Right. So try out these different opportunities as they present themselves, and figure out what's a good fit for you. I feel people make these career selections when we're typically 18 or 21, whatever it is, 25, early in their life. And you don't necessarily know what you want yet. So take the opportunity to figure out what's right for you and what's the best fit. And just because you didn't find it the first time that you tried doesn't mean that IO is not the right field, or there's so many different jobs out there. The other thing that I would say, and I saw that you had Alexis Fink on here as a guest a while back, and one of the things that I believe you all talked about was PSYOP. And I think joining PSYOP and attending PSYOP is honestly one of the best opportunities to just talk with people and figure out what their job in life looks like doing what they do. Like, don't be afraid to ask people about what they're doing, what they like, what they don't like about it, and learning from that, right? That's exactly what the field's all about. And most people are more than happy to talk with you. So I think that's a couple tips that I would have.
100%. That's we're a field full of learners. 100%. So
Yeah, absolutely.
it's great to hear the value that everybody sees in PSYOP, because I know Joe and I, when we went to PSYOP, we said that really validated our decision into IO.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of other people around our cohort as well felt that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a fun and inclusive group to be part of. So I think it's fantastic, and it provides that opportunity to learn and grow.
It's kind of cool just to meet other students too. Talk
It
about
is.
like the difference in your classes, the difference in your programs. Sometimes there's like, oh, I'm interested in this, and you're like, what's that? And then you learn about a whole different field that you didn't know previously.
Yeah, it is interesting. As you talk with different people that went to different programs, you do learn that people have different experiences. So, for example, like my program had an occupational health psychology specialization. Other people's probably have specializations in people analytics at this point, or different faculty who are specialized in that. I think it's pretty cool to learn about what those different specializations are that you maybe not have experienced all too much yet, or maybe just talk about it tangentially. So that's honestly a really great point, is talk with these other students too, see what they're doing and learning about.
Yeah. Does our program have a specialization, Joe? I'm trying to remember.
I
I
don't
don't
think
think we
so.
do.
We
Yeah.
we have like seminars, if I'm right. So like our second year, we'll have one class, and in that class, it's broken up into different 4-week segments, I believe, or three.
Yeah.
So I think one of them is people analytics. One of them, I'm not even going to speak on it because I don't know.
One's
But
HR,
it's something along those lines. So it is cool because it gives
Yeah.
you an idea of the different kind of fields out there. Uh, which you kind of spoke to, finding your right fit. Take charge that IO you're allowed to do this. I mean,
Yeah.
we've talked about it, I think, with every episode. Clinical psychology, you do clinical psychology. School psychology, you do school psychology. IO psychology, unless you're Tyler, you don't have a title that says IO psychology generally. There's so many different things that you can do. So
There are.
definitely find that right fit, because there can be a whole bunch out there.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Well, Tyler, we want to thank you so much for your time today and for really giving us a good deep dive into your role at HackerRank, and also just kind of going into like your way and what you've learned throughout your career, because I think these students are really going to find value in what you had to say. So thank you so much, Tyler.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and thank you guys for having me. I hope I could be helpful, and if anybody wants to talk, feel free to reach out. Always happy to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll leave his LinkedIn in the bio. Feel free to talk to Tyler.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Yeah, you too.
It was cool for Tyler to join us. I know we don't really get to talk about selection. Actually, this is probably our first episode we talk about selection and assessment. Did we?
Yeah, first episode talking mainly about selection.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. But yeah, just hearing about it in the tech industry with AI and everything in the middle, it was a great episode.
Yeah, I think we always say this, but this episode really does provide a lot of value for students because selection, I think personally, selection and training are probably two of the most used IO classes that I've been seeing when we talk with all these external practitioners and with all these people who are out in the field. Wouldn't you agree, Joe?
Yeah, because if you think of it in a whole, like training and development and selection and assessment, every single organization is going to use those. So learning best practices and most effective ways to do these things daily, especially as an IO psychologist, when we learn these things in courses, will be super valuable. So any way to increase those skills, I guess Tyler was talking about, will only help.
Yeah, and I'll add to that and say that those areas of IO also include a lot of the other areas in IO that we talk about. Like I know there was a lot of rollover with our research methods class and with our eyesight class and all of those in the training and in the selection. So those are very like all encompassing. So definitely for our students out there listening, check out those fields if you're interested in them and look at what you can do. But we really want to thank you guys for listening to us today. Thank you for joining us. And thank you again for Tyler for joining us. And hope you guys have a great week.
See you next week, guys.